that's the other thing that I found hard was not like smelling like plants or the earth. Obviously, like when you're sailing, if you're sailing like in the middle of nowhere, like you get used to the smell of the salts. And there's the day when you come close to land and you're going to arrive, you can smell the earth because it smells sweet.
Hi guys, welcome to the Unpacking Creative Lives podcast. I'm your host Banipreet, and this week we're talking to Pandora Jones. She's a watercolor painter. She's a sailor. She's a scuba diver. She's a traveler. She's a yoga instructor. She is awesome. In this week's episode, Pandora and I talk about her relationship to water, her painting process, and the importance of togetherness and women. Follow at I am Banipreet for weekly episode updates, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can keep up to date with Pandora's work on Instagram at Pandora Jones Art, or you could check out her website at www.pandorajones.com. Your parents, they got you and your brother Toby out of school, and you sailed with your family to New Zealand via Australia and South Africa. And I'm like, that is a bold move from your parents. So can you tell me a bit about them?
Yeah. So mum and dad always had this dream that they wanted to take their kids, their family sailing. And yeah, so when I was about 11, I think, and my brother was 10, they started the project of making the dream a reality. Yeah.
Wow. And so did they have a previous experience in sailing or?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think when they first met, they went on a sailing trip together to Brazil from the UK. And that was the first big sailing trip my mum had done. And yeah, so that was like the first sailing trip they did together. And I think sailing was just something they both really enjoyed. And they had a smaller boat when I was growing up. It was just like a very small sailboat that you would take out for day sailing. And I remember as a kid, like for our summer holidays, we would spend a lot of time on that sailboat. But I think they both had the dream to go a little bit further afield, if it were physically. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember your first experiences being on a sailboat and on water?
Yeah, it was on that small sailboat that I just talked about. And I remember it was racing that would happen in the south of England, and it was my dad and a friend of his, and they would take out the kids, but from memory I think they could only take out like one kid at a time because obviously it's like quite hectic racing. And I have this first memory of like, obviously there's like lots of ropes on boats, and I have this memory of my dad taking me, and I would like sit there and braid all the ropes together, which obviously like from a sailing perspective is a terrible thing because I was basically just creating knots in all the ropes. But yeah, that's my first memory of like getting told off for like braiding all the ropes together.
And you've got paintings of you braiding ropes as well. You've got a lot of paintings of that.
Yeah, like the motif of the knots and like what knots represent in the different knots. And yeah, maybe a slight fascination with rope work. Yeah.
When you first bought your first watercolor paints, then you realized that was your medium when you found that out. How did you know that was your medium?
I would always like draw as a kid, and it was like with pens and pencils, and it was a lot of line work. And I loved that because I could reach a lot of detail and kind of like create my own characters. And then I was using watercolor pencils, which is fun, but I think there's a lot more freedom in the watercolor paints. And yeah, I think I like saw something about these paints, and I had like put it off for a long time because they're quite expensive. And then I think I just decided I'm like sick of looking at this and wishing I had it. So I just bought a really small set. And I think I used it one day, and then I just kept like using it every day for that art challenge. It was like a very free way to color in the colors and the tones.
A lot of people find it hard to match their actual piece of work to what's in their imagination, be it a piece of writing, a music, a song, or a painting. And I
Mm.
wonder, how do you process that when you go from an idea to drawing something or painting something?
Yeah, there's definitely two ways I kind of go about it, where I have like a very fixed idea of what I want to see, like what I want to create, and I know what I want. And I think this is like from practice of like having the idea and then trying to make it a painting of it, and it never quite meets your expectations. And I think I just kept going and going until I know that if I see something in my head, like I feel fairly confident on how it's going to turn out. But in saying that, there's also the other way of approaching where you can have a loose idea, but be a bit more open to the spontaneity. Because sometimes you can do something and like having the element of play when you're making a creative piece, and something might come up that otherwise wouldn't have. So in that way, it's like still it's quite process based, because you're kind of like going along with the process and like feeling what comes up. Or does that make sense? Kind of like two ways to approach things. One is like quite controlled, and the other way is a lot more like free and yeah, being open to the possibilities and like what comes up during the creative process. Sometimes those are my favorite pieces because they end up surprising me.
Yeah, when you don't have to think too much and it just flows out.
Yeah, like lowering your expectations, or like being open to whatever comes up.
How often does discipline play in your work process?
Now that the my creative practice has like become a bit more bit of a business, I'm like still learning the balance between the business side and the creative side. But it's definitely like carving out the time and knowing yourself. Like in the mornings, I'm much more likely to want to paint than at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So yeah, discipline, I'm still learning. It's a challenging one because you have to be really good at disciplining yourself and setting out time slots for you. Yeah.
When I started to write, my goals changed for every time, so I would keep a time set aside, but I wouldn't have any expectations. So it's almost like bringing that spontaneity that you talked about, but having a set time, so no matter what, I show up. And a lot of writers have this, and a lot of musicians have this too. You show up for the time that you're allocated, and you either do the work or you do nothing. So you
Yeah.
have to pick. And that at the beginning really helped me creatively and to set a routine. But it certainly takes time. I think it's just the cycle of consistency.
True. And I think, like you said, like showing up, even if you don't feel motivated to do the work, I think there's something really valuable in showing up anyway. Because often, maybe you find this with writing, I don't know, is that 5 minutes of creative writing or creative painting or drawing can often lead to like, oh no, like now I feel like I'm in the mood to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. It,
Yeah.
it it's so, so true. Um, So I really want to talk about your traveling. And I
Mm.
wouldn't say traveling, I would just say living in different places. Traveling would mean that, you've been there for a short amount of time, but you've really lived in different countries.
Yeah, definitely feel very fortunate to have had that experience.
Between 2015 to 2020, you've lived in Europe. You've gone to an art residency in Washington State, USA. You've lived
Yeah.
in Spain. You've traveled to Turkey, Italy, Greece, France, Croatia. And then, as an addition, you learned to scuba dive. But I want to know something
Sound
about
like
what were you going to
I
say?
was about to say, so when you say it all like that, I'm like, wow, that sounds like a pretty busy life.
It does. I mean, I was just thinking, within a few decades of your life, you've really, I think, experienced life in a very different way, in a very untraditional way. And just in terms of like things and material items to keep on you, what's something that that's like been the most useful thing to keep with you? Because I'm sure you've learned how to travel a little lighter.
No. So okay, so the
Okay.
question is
My
like, what is
bad. My bad.
something? No, no, no. Like, so the question is like, what is something that I like always brought with me, like
Yeah,
wherever I
something
went?
that you just
Yeah,
know you can't live without during all your travels.
it's got to be a sketchbook. It's got to be like a small portable sketchbook. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you know you're
Yeah.
an
Is that
artist.
really cliche? I don't know. It
No,
was just like a small
no.
moleskin journal, and it was, I don't know, A5, and I would bring it wherever, and I would just open it if I was going somewhere new, or if I was going somewhere and I had some like alone time. It usually like came with me when I knew I was going to be by myself for a few hours. Yeah, and it could be writing, or sometimes it was like drawing from life, like drawing people at cafes without them knowing most of the time.
When people think about their identity, a lot of them associate it with place, a sense of place. And I wonder for you, how do you, I mean, is that a dialogue that you've had in your head? Or like if somebody asks you where you're from, what's your usual answer?
That's a good question. Um, I think I feel Australian, but like I wasn't born here. I was born in the UK, but then I also am half Canadian and half English. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting one, because not only have I been fortunate to travel in a lot of different places, my story isn't as, like, I guess, simple as I come from this place and that's where I'm from. Um, so yeah, I feel like a kind of a culmination of different cultures.
So when you came back from your travels, you came back in 2020 in Perth and you completed your yoga teacher training. And what made you decide to do that?
It had been something that I had thought about for quite a while, but I never had that chunk of time off to go and do it. Or, I mean, I could have, but I just didn't. And the opportunity came up where someone mentioned that a training was happening. And I thought it would be like a good thing, because it's something that I had wanted to do for a long time. But I don't think I realized that it was more than just like teaching yoga. It was a lot of like spiritual practices.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it was an awesome training. Yeah, it was learning about like traditional, like where yoga comes from, and just learning the history of it, and like the yamas and the niyamas, the principles. Because for my naive self, I think I thought it would be like a little bit of philosophy, and but it was a lot, and it was a lot of anatomy as well. So it felt like a very like holistic training, and definitely like opened up quite a few doors that, if you want to, you can like keep going down the rabbit hole if you want.
Yeah, I feel like that would be endless.
Yeah, I'm really glad I did that, because I definitely had like a newfound, it led me into other things like the breath work, which then like helps me in the free diving. So in a way, although it sounds like I do a lot of different things, I do feel like there is like a thread that kind of connects everything together
It seems like it's all interconnected.
somehow.
Can we talk about water? Because,
Water, yes, let's talk
yes,
about water.
there's so much to talk about in regards to water. Speaking of like the thread. So let's start with your
Hmm.
diving course. So you did a 6-week diving course and you learned how to free dive. And I wonder, did your relationship with water change after that?
I'm glad I had done the yoga, because I felt like I was more familiar with like the control of my breath, and like I felt familiar with that aspect. And then when it came to the free diving, it was like basically just learning how to breathe properly, like taking an optimum breath, and like relaxing the nervous system. And I felt really happy when I was learning all this, and I was like, oh, I understand this. Like I learned this before. It's not like a completely new subject to me, but
What was the breath work that you learned?
just it's just a breath work. breathwork sessions here in Perth that I go to by a really awesome lady, and it's basically just like a session of learning how to control your breath, like the inhale and the exhale, and different patterns of breathing. I don't think freediving is like, it's not as complicated. Like I'm talking about the breathing area of freediving. Like freediving isn't just breathing, but it's a big part of it, I found when I was doing the course.
So what is it about women in water that you're drawn to in regards to your subject in your work?
Yeah, I think it's an exploration of self, because I identify as a woman, and I have I've had a long relationship with the water, and only recently in the last couple of years has my experience been more under the water, because a lot of it has been like on the water on boats. And yeah, a very good friend of mine, my bestie, she encouraged me to do my scuba ticket. And I did it, and then I was like, why haven't I done this before? Because there's like a whole other world under there.
I'd never thought about the relationship above water and below water. I've never thought of that as separate.
Oh, it's so different. Like it's very quiet underneath the water, and it's almost like you can still hear things, but you feel, I don't know if this is cheesy, but like you feel held because you're like in the water, and the waters are all around you, and you're like very at the mercy of like the elements for the weather. You are as well above the water, but I feel like when you're in the water or under the water. But yeah, scuba is a little bit different because you go down and you're down at whatever depth for like a period of time. And freediving you can only go like as how far as your breath can take you, or how long you can hold your breath. But yeah, to answer your question about the women in the water, I think it's an exploration of self, which is selfish, but I think
it's your lens.
yeah, it's like my perspective. And definitely I would say like when I make paintings, I am exploring like my experience of the world, because how could I do it from someone else's experience? Like I don't know, I have no idea what it's like for someone else.
Yeah, and you also posted something about this. So you posted a portrait of Frida Kahlo, and you said that you understood her artwork acted as a tool to process life around her, as well as the discovery of self, And I just wonder, a lot of people understand who they are in the process of making something. Is that something that
100%.
you
Yeah.
explore? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like you've just hit the nail on the head. Yeah, exactly. Like I resonate with that a lot. And I'm so grateful I have the practice, because I don't know how my life would be without it. Not to sound too dramatic, but
No, it's not.
yeah, it's a really important part of my life.
Do you ever have blocks, like artist blocks?
I'm like thinking of a particular painting as you said that. I'm like looking at it like, I see you. I don't know how to finish you, but you're there. I'm not gonna throw you out because I want. Yeah. So the painting I'm thinking about is a painting. It was like of a goddess on a like lily pads, and she has a snake and a frog. And I wanted this painting to look a certain way, and I just like, I don't know, 20% started, and it's just not how I wanted it to look. And I know the right thing would be to start again. But yeah, that's an example of creative block. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard. I think it just takes a lot of patience. And it's interesting that you understand, you know what the right thing to do is, and maybe now's not the time, but just to let that sit and marinate, like you said. Let's talk about sailing for a minute. Where exactly have you sailed?
The big sailing trip with my family was the big one, from the UK down to Cape Town or Simonstown in South Africa. and that was like down the Atlantic Ocean. And we stopped off at Portugal, Spain, so like the group of islands there. And then my dad really wanted to go to this island called Saint Helena, and it's like this little island in the middle of the Atlantic.
What would be the toughest part about sailing?
That's such a good question. Where do I start? No.
Tell me it, because it's such a foreign life, you know. It's like a flight attendant. It's like a mysterious, but I'm sure that comes with a lot of challenges.
It's like finding alone time, and like feeling like you're still having your introverted needs met. Like even if you're an extroverted person, like extroverted meaning like your cup of energy gets filled up from being around different people. And I think sometimes I'm like that, but also my introverted self, like I do need time alone. I think that would be like one of the things that comes to mind first, is like finding the time and the space to be like by yourself.
Like setting boundaries in a limited space.
Yeah, because you're like obviously in quite a small space. It's not like you're living on land and you're like, I'm just gonna go to the park and enjoy some like times under the trees. That's the other thing that I found hard, was not like smelling like plants or the earth. Obviously, like when you're sailing, if you're sailing like in the middle of nowhere, like you get used to the smell of the salt. And there's the day when you come close to land and you're going to arrive, you can smell the earth because it smells sweet, usually. Yeah, that's something that like I never really realized. And then when you're like, oh, like we're close to land and you can smell land, it just smells different to the sea. Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. Like you could understand your bearings just by the smell around you. I mean, I have a confession. I am fascinated by you and your love for water. Well, not even a love, you know, it's like your life. But I could not think of anything more terrifying than being in the sea. And one day I feel like I'll do it because I don't like to be afraid of things. But it just like the idea of being like just surrounded by water makes me feel so unsafe. And
it's so funny you
so
say that, because like I know you do a lot of singing, and you do like a lot of singing like in front of a lot of people, and you seem like you get a lot of joy from it. But the thought of me like singing in front of a bunch of people, I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know.
So everyone's got
So
their
it's funny
thing.
how like everyone has their thing. I'm like, I don't know if I could do that. Like I could, but I don't think I would. I'm always amazed at how happy I feel like you're very happy, like, and it's like a gift that you want to share. And I'm like, I don't know if everyone needs the gift of me singing, because that kind of stresses me out.
You know, it's so interesting that you say gift because I think it's the things that we don't think twice about that we're meant to do in many ways. Like it just happens. So it's like Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. She talked about books and she was saying, you know, one, like, I don't love books. One doesn't love breathing. Like it's just something that you do.
You
You
have
know,
to do,
it's
yeah.
something that you don't even think about. Like you don't think about breathing. You know, in one of your posts, you drew a picture, and it's one of your early posts on Instagram. You drew a picture of the words "done is better than perfect." And
Yeah.
that was something that you got from the Business Video Summit. It was like Jennifer Lee Wright's Brainers. And I wonder how you have used that line in your life.
That was an amazing course. So that quote was from a program that Jennifer Lee, I think she's based in California, and she wrote the book, The Right Brain Business Plan. And that was the first time I had like thought about connecting my creative practice with like this business idea. But yeah, that quote, done is better than perfect, was something that came up. And
do you believe it?
Yeah, like, I mean, what's perfect? Nothing is perfect. And I think as a creative, or me personally, this is my opinion, sometimes I get really caught up in like the very finite details, and something doesn't look like quite perfect. Like yeah, but then it's also like you just need to get it done. And if your goal was to get something out there or have like a completed project, or you have this goal of like um having an offering, perhaps like the example that's coming to mind now is like I want to offer like my calendar that features my artwork, and I just hummed and awed for way too long about the format of the calendar. And then I was like, you know what, like done is better than perfect. No one is going to be like obsessed about, like I was like obsessing about like, is it better to have it this way or that way, or landscape or portrait, or like a book or not a book, or a collection of pages. And I was like, I just need to get this done. And I think done is better than perfect is like a really good antidote for people like myself who struggle with this like idea of perfectionism and like only wanting to do something if it's like perfect, because that doesn't exist.
Elizabeth Gilbert said that perfectionism is fear just in really fancy shoes. You know, like the haute couture
100%.
of
Yeah.
fear. She said that once, and
Yeah.
I thought about that when you were saying it. I feel like women especially are just harder on themselves in general. Like for me, it's not only like being the minute things, like the minute details of things. It's also like, oh, I have to study this before I do this. Like it's like, oh, I've got to learn so much of this before I actually get started. It's always that, which I'm like trying to work with and figure out, but it's a constant dialogue.
Yeah. You touch on so many important parts, like the done is better than perfect. I feel like really fosters like this positive momentum, and that like maybe you're finding this is like if you just get it done, you're creating this like positive energy to just continue on and on, rather than this like from a place of like stopping and starting, and just like you just keep getting stuff done, or your ideas become like come into fruition, if it were. But you also touch on a really important part about women struggling with it too. I'm sure men struggle with it as well, but yeah, I don't know, like I think there's a lot of external expectations um of like, yeah, of all these things that we have to be, but in reality, yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that subject, because that's a pretty big subject to go down. But
Yeah, we could have like
yeah,
another episode on women and life, just and
oh
unpack.
man, you could have a whole season.
I know, I could. That's actually so true. I could. But yeah, you're right. I think men also struggle with it because I've interviewed, people, and some people say, it's confidence. Everyone's going through their own discourse and inner monologue of just trying to get the work done. And some
Yeah,
people who
and
look
dealing with fear,
yeah, and dealing with
like,
perfectionism, like, and fear in
mhm.
so many different shapes. The could, would, should. Like the dangerous things that I still work with. Like I'm still trying to
Could, would, should,
figure out.
very
Like
dangerous.
they should be deleted out of the dictionary. Um, yeah, it's
I
super
think the word
interesting.
should be deleted.
Agreed. Okay, so you've done like art residencies. You've been doing wine and workshop ladies' nights.
That was,
You,
yeah.
yeah. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, that was really cool, because I did a couple online workshops last year, and the feedback I got was so positive, and I never thought of myself in a way of like passing on information, I guess like a teacher. Like I was like, that's not, like, who am I? Which goes back with touches on the imposter syndrome. So I was very much like, who am I? Like, what are people going to learn from me? Like, what? I don't understand. Like, anyone could go and pick up paints and like, I don't know, figure out like how to paint. And then when I did those online workshops, I mean, it was mostly pretty much all friends. And it was really awesome because it was like friends all over the world. But yeah, the online workshops morphed into in-person workshops, which I only have started doing this year. But everyone that does a painting or like makes the painting, I swear, like every single person is so pleasantly surprised with what they create. I have really enjoyed doing the workshops. Yeah, that's been like one of the highlights of my year probably. I feel very fortunate that people want to pay and they want to like spend the time to do that, because I think what they get out of it, it's like very, I feel like it fills my soul. There's no really other way to say it. There was my favorite workshop that I did, which was Connect to Your Inner Goddess. And that was like hands down my favorite.
Tell me, why was that your favorite?
I think because it was like a combination of, like, I did a goddess like visualization at the beginning, and I had learned how to do that from yoga, like walking people through
That interconnectedness, that thread.
yeah. So it's like I felt confident in leading a group of people with their eyes closed. And if you had asked me that like a year ago to do that, I would be like, I don't know how to do that. Like, how do I even? So yeah, so that was really cool, like bringing in the principles or like the skills from yoga.
And who knew that you would bring that skill to a workshop? Like, that's not something people usually do in a workshop where they close their eyes and visualize.
But I think the opportunity to breathe, because I also did like made people like take a few deep breaths. And I think that really settles people.
You have all these different friends all across the world, you know, maybe friends in groups, maybe just one on one friends as well, to feed both your introverted and extroverted sides. And I wonder, what is a good friend to you? What does it mean to be a good friend?
I love this question. What does it mean to be a good friend? I think I think I'm like thinking of one friendship in particular, and um, we always have each other's back. Like we are always an active ear and always a support. Like no matter what comes up, um, it's kind of like I'm here for you no matter what. Like not just through positive things, through difficult things or challenges. And I think it's like the consistency of like showing up no matter what. um I think that's what makes a good friend. Yeah, always feeling like they're in your corner.
Hmm,
Yeah.
that's really nice. They're always in your corner. That's so sweet. You know, you have your wine and workshop ladies nights, you've done your art residencies, you sell ocean inspired teas, so you've got custom painting that you do in your artworks, and then you also run market stalls in Perth, and you've painted murals. What's next for you?
I'm launching a calendar, which I'm quite excited about, and I'm super excited because it features like a collection of women, and it's like a group of women together, which I think was something I wanted to have in the artwork, because although this artwork, like I love the colors, I think there's something more powerful about like a group of women together, because it has this idea of collectiveness. So that's happening, and I made a goddess calendar that's like a 12-month like an artwork per month. And I was really on the fence about whether to create like an ocean calendar or a goddess calendar, and I was like, what would people want? And I was like, you know what, Pandora, you can do both. So I did both. So I'm really excited for the goddess calendar, because that's been something that I have been talking about for a long time. And I guess we come back to done is better than perfect. It's not perfect, but it's really important. It was really important for me that I get it out there, because um, the feedback I've been getting from women from the type of artwork, like the more goddess, the goddess collection, if it had a name, has been really positive. And so I think the word empowering has come up quite a few times. And if I can make stuff that empowers other women, like, yeah, that's awesome. I'm stoked.
What do you never want to say when you're 90 years old looking back at your life?
What do I never, wow, I love these questions, Fanny. What do I never want to say when I'm 90 years old? Um, I don't know. I should have told them I love them.
That's so nice.
I'm gonna cry.
Pandora, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I love these questions. They're so good.
How good was that episode? I loved it. I'll see you all next week for another one.